Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and these are your sun and rising sign horoscopes for the month of December 2019. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the fire signs. We're going to look at Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. I recommend using your rising sign, but generally speaking, you can use either the sun or the rising, and sometimes checking out both is helpful as well. So let's go ahead and dive in, and we'll start with Aries. There are four groupings of transits that I'm looking at this month. I'm kind of breaking them into four little chunks because that's going to be the easiest way of dealing with it. But this is, you could say that the effects of these transits are pretty much in effect all month. So I don't feel the need to break them up too concretely because the themes, again, are going to be carrying over really from the start to the end of the month. First of all, let's talk about the transits that are taking place in the sign of Capricorn this month. You have on December 2nd, Jupiter is going to work its way into the sign of Capricorn in your 10th house. So you can see Jupiter right here at the end of Sagittarius going to bounce into your 10th house. That's a huge transition of Jupiter from one whole sign house to the next in your birth chart. That's being accompanied by, that's on December 2nd, the 11th through the 14th or 10th through the 14th, Venus in Capricorn will conjoin Saturn and Pluto. So we're going to see a confluence of Venus moving through this sign and conjoining with Saturn and Pluto like the 10th through the 14th. I'll move this ahead just a day or two so you can see what it's going to look like when Jupiter bumps into that sign. The gist of it is that you're going to have a very packed 10th house in Capricorn. And then on the 25th into the 26th, right on Christmas, there is a solar eclipse conjoined with the planet Jupiter that will be also in your 10th house. So loads of action in the 10th house this month. Let's keep it simple. The 10th house was originally called the house of karma or praxis, which meant action. This is a house that tells us about the actions that you will be compelled to take in the world. You don't have a lot of choice in the matter. This is a critical house that really defines your journey in life and the kinds of things that you may do for a living or that you may come to be known for publicly, whether that's fame or infamy, as well as just the main plot line that drives your life forward in the sense of having a purpose or a calling out in the world, out in the grand narrative of the collective. So when planets come through this house, there's oftentimes a huge emphasis on your career, but it can mean more broadly speaking that there are big turns happening in the sort of calling or destined trajectory, the destined storyline of your life in general. So you want to watch for that this month, specifically because Jupiter is entering your 10th house, which means there's a lot of growth and expansion that's coming, potentially professionally. A solar eclipse towards the end of the month, that has the feeling of a new chapter that's opening up in your life. Venus moving through conjunctions with Saturn and Pluto has the feeling of being very contractive and heavy, maybe a little bit more difficult, especially in the area of relationships in your life right now. Maybe relationships that have something to do with your work or things changing in the workplace, or a degree of heaviness, but also regeneration and rebirth in the workplace, or again, with Venus, potentially any kind of relationships. Now, Jupiter brings expansion into your career house, like right now and for the whole year to come, but it's Jupiter in its fall in the sign of Capricorn, which means that there can be a certain contractive, heavier, difficult energy. It's a great year, but there's a ton of work. It's a great year, but there's reordering or restructuring of some kind. It's a great year, but there are challenges with authority figures in the workplace or turnover of management or things like that. It's a good year, but you're starting from the bottom floor, working your way up. It's a long-term process or project that you're building right now. There's reason to be hopeful, but this is a very sober, realistic Jupiter compared to, any other sign that Jupiter would travel through. Okay, so that's your emphasis on the 10th house for the month, but also kind of a banner month because of the solar eclipse and Jupiter's ingress into the 10th house. This month is a kind of turning point for you, either broadly speaking in terms of the storyline of your life, something significant is changing, or in terms of career dynamics in particular. Now, the other transits that I have my eye on this month involve squares from the sun in Sagittarius in your 9th house to Neptune in Pisces in the 12th house. That's going to happen around the 7th of the month. But then what we're going to see, and I'll just move this forward a little bit so you can see how this works. Then Mercury is also going to enter your 9th house, and that's happening around the 9th of the month. And then around the 20th of the month, Mercury in Sagittarius will also move into a square with Neptune. So you're going to eventually see, let me see if I can point this out here. You're eventually going to see Mercury moving through the square to Neptune as well. Now, the reason that this is a big deal is because the full moon around the 11th or the 12th is also going to fall in the sign of Gemini in your 3rd house down here. And basically what that entails is a kind of what we might call a T-square. There's a lot of energy sort of pouring through. Let's see if I can get this correct. It's hard to jump around here. There we go. So a lot of energy pouring through the cadent houses 3, 9, and 12 with the full moon in Gemini, right? So these houses have a lot to do with the mind, with your beliefs, with the topics of learning and education, sometimes technology, but also with the 12th house. There is the 12th house is a house where your doubts may be a topic for exploration, or your inner shadows, or some kind of self-destructive streak that you're looking at, as well as the need sometimes to turn inward or to look for a little bit of healthy seclusion, but also potentially the topics of depression or isolation. So it's a little bit of it has the feeling of a month that could be very educational, where the topic of your beliefs or ideals, or even the topics like ethics or justice or the law or the search for truth in the universe, faith, these kinds of things, even education in a general sense, can be a topic. But this isn't just a nice 3rd house, 9th house month. We've got the square going on from both the sun and Mercury and the full moon to Neptune in the 12th house. So that usually means that there is a subtext going on this month in the life of the mind. You could say that you're exploring your doubts, again, at a very deep level and trying to work through them. Could be a crisis of faith, kind of looking for the truth and feeling confused as to what to believe or not to believe. There's a potential for there to be kind of an otherworldly quality to these transits, because Neptune will sometimes connect us with altered states of consciousness, with things that are transcendental, highly imaginative, but sometimes you can't tell if they're real or not, or if they're grounded in reality or not. So the question of intellectual, mental, analytical discernment, as well as allowing yourself to go beyond the confines of the mind. There could also be just a sense in which you are moving through different levels of mental or intellectual conflict with others this month. The full moon in Gemini in the 3rd house is very communicative, curious. It's a nice social energy, but its ruler Mercury is in the opposite house of the 9th in its detriment, opposing the moon, and both are squaring Neptune, which basically, again, could mean that when it comes to the communication of beliefs, ideals, philosophies, there may be some conflict, and it may also be difficult to sort out what you actually believe or what you actually think. It's a great month to reflect very deeply on your beliefs, or to open your mind to something that maybe is a little challenging for you, or to consider the beliefs and ideas of others. You also have to be careful of the idea of, persuasion, and basically getting a little pushed around or pushing others around with some kind of intellectual or, some kind of agenda, basically. But I like the optimism of this transit as just a really great time of learning and reflection, spiritually and intellectually. So we'll see how that's taking place this month. I'd love to hear your take on that transit in particular, because it was one that I sat and riddled with for a while, just being like, okay, what exactly is going on here? It seems to be a transit that should bring a lot of learning and the conversation about beliefs, teachers, ideas, and thought, but also like, how do these things play out in our lives and our relationships, and maybe some degree of confusion or doubt, or a little bit of an existential crisis of sorts related to one's faith. So at any rate, the final transit of the month that I've really got circled for everyone this month is Venus's eventual square to the planet Uranus. So that happens pretty late in the month, and I'll pull this around. So here's Venus in your 11th whole sign house, making a square to Uranus in the 2nd house. And I think this transit kind of goes along with what I was just saying. Here you have Venus in the house, the 11th, that was associated with groups, friends, allies, benefactors, colleagues, basically anyone who either is helping you with something or shares similar values, goals, ideals. It also is a house that has to do with helping other people in a general sense, being an ally to people or having allies. So the interesting thing is that Venus in that house would typically bring, kind of camaraderie, friendships, allies. It would just kind of highlight the joy and pleasantness of friends and groups. But we have Venus square to Uranus here, who is the disruptor, the innovator, the rebel. So there's some kind of shakeup happening for you socially this month. And I think it has a lot to do with faith and beliefs or a faith community or an academic environment or something like that, or some kind of challenge that you have of navigating differing ideas, conflicts that are mental or intellectual with others who are close to you, or having people challenge your views in a healthy way. That's just one possibility. The other thing here could be something about a shakeup around money, finances, and friendships, or money and groups. Somehow opportunities arising that are sort of spontaneous and interesting around making money or around business. Okay, so that's what I've got for Aries. Let's move ahead to Leo. So, and we'll go back to the beginning of the month and sort of start over. So for Leos, let's start over with Capricorn, right? Capricorn is the energy of all of these transits. Jupiter in Capricorn starting on December 2nd. And then between the 10th and the 14th, Venus is going to conjoin with Saturn and Pluto in this house. And then on the 25th into the 26th, we have a new moon solar eclipse conjoined with Jupiter in your 6th house. So what do we make of all of that? It helps to understand the meaning of the house, because when you have a confluence of energies flowing through one house in a month, the best thing to do is to understand the house. So the 6th house was traditionally called the joy of Mars and the house of misfortune. Mars symbolized, for example, hard work and labor, like labor in the fields where it's just backbreaking, you're under the sun. That's why the house is also associated with slavery and slaves in the old world, but not alone. It was a house of drudgery. So if you have a job that you don't like doing because it's really hard work and it's aggravating, that's the 6th house. On the other hand, any kind of hard labor, even if it's for a good cause, could be the 6th house, just hard, grueling work in general. There's an aura of sacrifice that's always surrounded the 6th house. This was the joy of Mars, and Mars was originally the planet of martyrs, or people who gave in selfless sacrifice. And so the idea of dying for something, like the military was traditionally located in the 6th house, military training and service and warfare, all things where you fight for something that you believe in or some kind of cause, but also people who were, mercenaries or people for hire who would just fight for, a dollar. The 6th house also has to do with anything chronically frustrating, debilitating, or causing accident or injury or harm, ill health, but also, again, people like surgeons or medics or people who work in the trenches, social workers, doctors, nurses, people who are there working in the terrain of suffering. Now, when you have Jupiter, a noble and ennobling planet, a planet of expansion and the moral order of the universe, Zeus, right, entering this house, but Venus conjoining Saturn and Pluto, but as in a solar eclipse in the 6th house, there are some really big, there's some challenging things happening right now. The simplest thing we could say about Jupiter entering this house and the solar eclipse with Jupiter happening this month in your 6th house is that there is, in the year ahead, you're going to be doing hard work for something that you believe in, or there's going to be hard work involved, but there's some sense of the goodness behind it, or the need for charity or help from others while dealing with a hard time. There's some noble cause here, I think. The other thing that could be there is having to work or slave away for something that looks good on the surface, but that as you go on, you discover not all it's cracked up to be, or it's something selfish posing in the costume of something generous or benevolent. That's Jupiter's complication in the sign of Capricorn. But it's a year where, the Jupiter wants to bring abundance and wants to bring that noble, virtuous goodness. But it's moving into a house that's filled with hard work and oftentimes a degree of suffering. Now, that doesn't mean something good can't come of it. But with Jupiter, it's going to be a long-term plan. It's going to be hard work, laying a foundation. So that's kind of what I'm seeing right there for Leos with Jupiter in the 6th. Then the new moon solar eclipse announces the same thing, a new chapter opening up that's like this Jupiterian ideal. Now, Venus hitting Saturn and Pluto between the 10th and the 14th of the month, that's a little bit more complicated. That feels like a difficult, maybe a bit of a battle zone. What's that song, Love is a Battlefield? It feels that way for Venus. Friendships, allies, love, relationships, going through a sobering, difficult period. This could be a lover who's sick, or a friendship or relationship that has to work through something difficult. Now, Pluto is regenerative, so there's hope here that some healing can be experienced, but hard work around Venusian things this month, which could also apply for you to siblings, sisters, friends, because Venus is also the ruler of your 3rd house of siblings and brethren and kin, which was the 3rd house originally. And also this could be taking place to some extent with regard to your career. And we say that also because Jupiter is trine to Uranus in the 10th house this month, which is actually something I forgot to mention for Aries. Sorry, Aries people. You can see that the Jupiter for people who have the Aries energy, just backing up a second in case I missed that for Aries. The Jupiter trine to Uranus is expansive for everybody this month. It signals the potential for real breakthroughs. So, for Aries, that was in their career house. Sorry, everyone. Now, Jupiter, for you, similar idea, right? Jupiter's hitting a trine to Uranus in your career house. So we're talking about, some hard work, but something that you believe in and something that has the potential to be quite revolutionary with the trine to Uranus in the 10th house that's taking place this month. Okay. Yeah, I actually made a note not to forget Jupiter trine to Uranus because I did in my monthly overview video, and then I just almost forgot it again. So that is my bad. Anyway, all right. So the other major transit of the month, of course, is a series of transits between the Sun and Mercury in Sagittarius, which land in your 5th house, and a square to Neptune in Pisces. Now, the Sun will square Neptune in Pisces around the 7th of the month. Mercury enters Sag around the 9th, and then Mercury will square Neptune around December 20th. In the meantime, the full moon, you can see right here about the 9th, is going to come through like the 10th, 11th, and it's going to land in Gemini in the 11th house. Let's scoot this along so you can see that. So we're creating a bit of a T-square this month between these 3 areas of the chart. Now, that's the 5th house, the 11th house, and the 8th house. So let's talk about what that might mean, especially given the influence of Neptune in the midst of the Sagittarius and Gemini axis, kind of T-squaring the 2 right there. So the simplest thing we can say is that there is something for everyone of ideological or philosophical concern this month, or educational or mental or intellectual, or even communicative. It's mental energy in a general sense, but potentially the interest in faith, belief, and larger encompassing visions of the universe or truth or moral order or politics. So it gets ideological, in other words. And then there's this, this emphasis on the Gemini full moon around the 10th and the 11th. But the moon in Gemini is in Mercury's sign, and Mercury is opposed to the moon in the sign of its detriment, Sagittarius. So all of this is saying that it could be a month where there's a lot of emphasis on the mind and a transformation of the mind, but it's specific for you to groups of people, the 11th house, allies or friends. And you may be trying to figure out, okay, where do I stand as an individual, and how do my own beliefs and ideals or my own creative needs compromise with those that I have larger allegiance with? For example, if you're in a religious or academic environment, or you're a larger social group of friends or something like that, the question might be, you are in some ways needing to depart from the norm this month, or your friends are getting into things that you have some disagreement with, or there is something happening in a group you belong to where there are conflicting philosophical views. Figuring out how to be yourself and how to not succumb to peer pressure, or how to allow others to be themselves and to have differing values or ideals from you, but still come together on larger issues that are very important to you and maybe even to your career or general life path. This could be very confusing because of the T-square to Neptune all month, where, Neptune can create this easily persuadable environment where you're easily taken in by people because maybe you want to be on their good side, or you want to be popular, you want to be liked, or you may have the potential to persuade others to your point of view, but that may not be the healthiest thing in the world. The tension between differences and unity on the mental, intellectual, or spiritual levels this month, and how to be a creative individual, but how to be a part of something bigger. It's going to be a challenging theme, and especially when there's something at stake, something that somebody needs or wants or desires that can, twist or taint things just a little bit. Okay, so that's the Sag Pisces transits with the full moon in Gemini in your 11th, 5th, and 8th. This is also about karmic debts with other people, really deep, intricate kind of web of what you are owed and what you owe other people, you could say karmically in this lifetime, especially within groups of people or larger cultures that you belong to or something like that. All right. Anyway, that was a little enigmatic, sorry. Last but not least, Venus around the 22nd of the month is going to enter, you're going to see Venus enter the sign of Aquarius in your 7th house of relationships and move through a square the 20th to the 22nd to Uranus in your 10th house of career. This is interesting. Venus entering the 7th house is good for relationships. It brings harmony and a certain degree of happiness into relationships. That's good after Venus went through Saturn and Pluto in the middle of the month. Now towards the end of the month, Venus is, moving into a happier house in your chart, one that should bring more pleasing interactions with others. But Venus is hitting the square to Uranus, the rebel, the disruptor, the innovator, the agent of sudden revolution that's unexpected. So Venus is going through a lot this month. I think that there's something really good cooking for you this month around relationships and friendships, or even greater professional allegiances, but it's going to go through a real shakeup, a little bit more serious the first half of the month. Later in the month, I think things get more creative with this transit, more interesting, but the need to break free and look for greater independence is going to be a theme, whether it's people that need to break away from you or you from them. But this should also provide you with new creative outlets should be coming through at the same time, and should actually benefit your professional life as well. Okay, so let's go on now. Let's go back to the beginning of the month and let's take a look at Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, we're going to start with the same idea of the Capricorn transits being the biggest of the month. And those are all going to fall in your 2nd house. Now that is the house of money, finances, resources, values, and even esteem, one's own esteem, right? So when you look at the 8th house, for example, traditionally we can associate it with the esteem of others. This is the house that has a lot to do with our own self-esteem, our own values, our own possessions, resources, money, the things that belong to us that we are in possession of, whether it's an inner resource or whether it's the amount of money in our bank account. Now, this house has the connotation of being a little materialistic. You have to be careful because this house sometimes points to a certain level of indulgence or the complicated relationship that we have with material things in the material world. Now, Jupiter enters this house on December 2nd, and then you've got a new moon solar eclipse on December 25th and 26th, and then Venus is going to go through a conjunction to Saturn and Pluto between the 10th and the 14th. It's a lot of emphasis on the 2nd house. So what can we say? Well, first of all, there are significant changes happening, let's say, around your money, values, resources, and finances this month. Sometimes that means with Jupiter entering that house, that you're going to start a new chapter of your life financially, but that in some ways it is marked by austerity, or it's marked by the need to limit or redefine or start from the ground up, or you're building something, and it's exciting, and there's a certain aura of potential success, but it's long-term success, you could say, or it's building from some more bare foundation, like, starting to build a house in the middle of winter or something, trying to set a foundation in a rock hard ground. It has the feeling of having to deal with adversity, potentially financially, or some significant changes financially that you have to work through. And it's a big upheaval of some kind. You're also looking at the potential for there to be issues around money and love, or money and relationships, or money and friendships. where Venus is moving through the conjunction to Saturn and Pluto between like the 10th and the 14th. That can just signify again that the theme of deep structural transformations around your assets, money, wealth, resources, the value you place on your own time and energy, stuff like that, going through significant changes, a total restructuring with Saturn, Pluto about to conjoin in January. But Venus, again, moving through the conjunction to Saturn and Pluto says, and now is where there's an intersection between this restructuring process and the people that you love or are close to, or, you know, romantic interest or something like that. You also, it's Venus, Saturn to Pluto in the second can also mean you're literally selling or getting rid of possessions, or that you're dealing with some kind of investment or asset or resource, and maybe something a little bit more difficult or heavy. It's not a bad time to purge and to think about getting simple and clean so that you have a start for the future. So it looks good for you, but some real work involved in the whole year ahead. And the solar eclipse speaks to that as well on the 25th and 26th. Solar eclipses take, 5 to 6 months to play out. All right. So the next transits that I really want to pay attention to this month for you Sagittarians, the Sun and Mercury in your home sign, making a square to Neptune in your 4th house of home and family. And then right around the 10th or the 11th, we have the full moon in Gemini coming through the 7th house. So there's kind of a T-square energy between houses 1, 4, and 7 that's playing out this month through the lunar cycle and through, again, Mercury and the Sun squares to Neptune in the 4th. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, the area questions about your sense of who you are, what your values are, what your beliefs are, really highlighted right now. There's a sense of a new beginning that you're probably really excited about. But the question is, are the people that are close to you on board with it? Are they helping or hindering that energy or that process? We ask that because the full moon is going to fall in the 7th house of relationships in the sign of Mercury, Gemini, and Mercury will be opposed to the moon in the sign of its detriment, Sagittarius, in the 1st house. This generally means ideological, mental, intellectual conflict or tension. Could be very creative in nature, doesn't have to be bad, in relationships or between yourself and others. And it might be related ultimately to how you were raised, to issues pertaining to home and family, to deep healing and transformation happening around home, family, roots, concerns about property or where you're living, and things of that nature. So that's where so much of the energy is constellated for you this month. Not a bad month to be compromising in your relationships, but also be careful of trying to persuade or being persuaded too intensely. Also be careful of people who are just very rigid and who will not, come over to your side of the court a little bit more. So that can be a sign for you that something may not be working. And this may, again, have a particular, like you may notice that this has something to do around finances and maybe things pertaining to the home or family or living environment, just because of the emphasis of all the 2nd house energy and Neptune in the 4th. Okay. And it may not be clear or easy to see what's real and what's true and what to prioritize. Neptune in the 4th is, it's kind of like a person who's homeless does not have, it's not always easy to think and negotiate clearly. You're susceptible to being taken advantage of if you're trying to get a lease done, let's say, on a new apartment and you're homeless at the moment, right? You could easily get taken advantage of in that situation. There's something like that potentially happening this month where Neptune creates a very deep-rooted level of vulnerability that could cloud or make difficult decisions around relationships or conversations or debates that are somehow happening within your relationships. Okay, so let's go forward now to the last energy of the month that I'm really kind of concerned about. And I did, God, I did it again. I almost forgot for this month, the other thing that's happening for you is that I'll come around to Venus and Uranus in a second, but Jupiter is also trying to Uranus this month. So you'll see that happening like right about here. Happens around the right around the winter solstice. Jupiter is going to trine Uranus. This is actually a fantastic energy in terms of the potential for a real breakthrough. But with Uranus in the 6th house for Sagittarians, it's going to involve the element of hard work or of sudden unexpected disruptions or challenges that come up that are actually accelerating some kind of growth process. So you have to trust that any kind of potentially unexpected setbacks that's come up this month, they may actually be a blessing in disguise. So watch for that. All right, so not forgetting Jupiter and Uranus. All right, now let's go. It's so funny. It's such a big transit to forget. All right, anyway, now let's go to Venus and Uranus. Here we go. There we are. Okay, so last but not least, the other thing that's happening is around the 20th to 22nd, Venus in Aquarius is going to, or Venus is going to enter Aquarius and then immediately square Uranus in the 6th house. So again, that Uranian energy right around the winter solstice. There's a potential there for this kind of breakthrough in relationships or friendships, or the need to break away from someone or something that it has been maybe a little entangling in an unhealthy way. Venus Uranus with an element of 6th house involved means there's some greater degree of freedom, creativity, innovation, the need for experimentation, originality, independence. It's a very freedom loving transit. But Venus has to negotiate trying to be peaceful and harmonizing with other people. And the 6th house is a house that generates conflict or challenges. So generally speaking, we're looking at some kind of potential moment of greater liberation and freedom, creative breakthrough of some kind, especially in relationships. And again, very mental, verbal, communicative with the 3rd house. But this is a breakthrough that is going to involve a little bit of stress or potential disruptiveness in relationships. Like this could be the moment where you have to have a challenging conversation with a sibling or a friend. Ultimately, it's positive, but it needs to happen so some kind of misunderstanding or something can be disentangled that is holding you back or something like that. So a little bit of a moment of diplomatic challenge, but ultimately I think creative breakthrough around the 20th to 22nd. And this may also have something to do with money and finances as Jupiter's hitting the trine from the 2nd house to Uranus in the 6th at the same time. You could also be trying to help someone else get free of something difficult by donating something or something like that. So it could be some kind of humanitarian or charity work as well. All right, so that's what I've got for the month for Sagittarians. I hope that this was interesting for all of you fire signs. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you guys again for the first horoscope of the year, which will be coming up next month. And we have a big, big Saturn and Pluto transit to look at in January. So thanks so much, everyone. Bye.